Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Welcome to the tier list recap for September 2025, the first recap that includes community picks. We had a great time on stream for this, capping out at 200 viewers, which is wild. Chat voted for where each wrestler should go on the tier list. Some of the results were really close. A few wrestlers had 3 options split around 30% each, so every vote mattered. In the end, Chad and I agreed on 16 placements and disagreed at least a little on the other 26. And that means we can turn this into a fun little competition. Since this is the pilot episode of Spiffy vs. the World, let's start with the picks where we agreed and then get into the competition aspect after that. Ono Sato, started S tier, stayed S tier. A last second Hakawoho yeet on day 4 is the only thing that prevented both Yokozuna from running undefeated through day 11. Given his long-standing struggles against Hoshoryu, he's lucky his fellow Yokozuna basically choked it against Kotozakura on day 13 because he needed both chances he had at the title at the end. It still looks like a matchup Hoshoryu should win most of the time, but yet again, Ono Sato just wins more against everybody else. Hoshoryu. 13-2 is a clear bump to S tier. Still, everyone had good reason to agree on placing him at A injury tier. The prodigal nephew kept coming up with battle wound after battle wound, and even when healthy had a habit of dropping a couple matches per basho that he had no business losing. The 11-0 sprint to start is the sort of thing we've been waiting for, but that no one could expect until it happened. It remains to be seen whether this will be a regular occurrence, but with Aonishiki looking set to cause as many problems for him as he causes for Ono Sato, keeping up with his fellow Yokozuna looks all the more daunting going forward. Daieisho. A injury tier definitely got the injury part right. Nobody knew how healthy Daieisho would be in September, just that he had the capacity to blast the mid to low ranks. Unfortunately, his health was a massive issue for the first half of the tournament. Even in the second half, when he spun a 5-2 finish, he was still mainly just pushing with his arms. He'd simply adjusted to the lack of weaponry. All the same, his 7-8 finish means he'll likely hold rank, so as long as he didn't aggravate his injury and doesn't before November, he should have a better chance to do what we all know he's capable of at this level. Kotozakura, B tier pick across the board, although I'm sure he surprised a lot of people with how quickly he reached 8 wins. He absolutely gave one away to Takayasu, and winning there would have kept him in the hunt, so there was still a lost opportunity. But this was the best he's looked since his championship at the end of 2024, which makes it all the more unfortunate he damaged his MCL against Hoshoryu. In tier list terms, B was clearly correct despite dropping out, since it's very unlikely he'd have beaten Ono Sato and somehow hit 11 wins. But at this point, all that matters is the severity of his knee injury. Kirishima and Takayasu. B injury tier was a pretty easy call for each of them, and as with Daieisho, injury was the most correct part of these picks. Kiri looked great in racing out to a 4-0 start, but after his first loss to Aonishiki, he went from dominant sumo to instantly having issues being competitive. His fighting spirit still showed, but he simply couldn't hang with almost anyone. Takayasu essentially had Kiri's basho in reverse. Going from an 0-6 start to a 7-8 finish means, yet again, that for all of Papa Bear's efforts to work around his bad back, his fan club probably needs to crowdfund him a good chiropractor. Shodai. Shodai jumps to B tier, something I doubt it occurred to anyone to put on their bingo cards. Granted, we all saw this as a basho for Shodai to show out a little bit, climb a few ranks, not dip too close to the bottom of the division. 8 wins, maybe 9, regular Shodai things, right? What we got? You know when everything goes well, people say the stars aligned? For the Dark Lord, I think it's all the black holes in the galaxy aligned. His matchups for the first 9 days made his 8-1 start, in retrospect, not all that shocking. Daieisho was still way off, he crushes Roga, Kinbo Slice was struggling, and everyone else was the type of much smaller opponent Shodai generally does well against. To be honest, if he had any inkling he'd do this well, I don't think he'd have lost him at Takayumi either. Beating Aonishiki though? Aonishiki's relatively small, so Shodai should usually have a decent chance against him, but we never see him fight like he did there. Being on a massive roll though, it was like Tamawashi from July getting going and stonking out. Especially with someone who's shown the capacity Shodai has in the past, this can lead to a lot of what would normally be surprising wins. Of course, he followed up with the most Shodai thing imaginable, beating Aonishiki and then immediately losing to Ryuden. This fucking guy, I swear to God. With Wakamoto Haru, however, we have someone who performed pretty much as expected. Losing to Hiroto was a little surprising, given he'd won 3 straight in the head-to-head, and he was able to beat an injured Kirishima, but the win over Aonishiki was more surprising than everything he did in the first 14 days combined. And it really shouldn't be. Waka's a good, strong grappler, the kind of guy who absolutely should get some wins against Aonishiki. Regardless, Waka remained a bastion of stability in this basho and made all our C+ picks look very smart. Onokatsu. 7-8 makes us all correct for putting Onokatsu at C+, but his basho was both disappointing and unfortunate. He was 5-3 at one point, with losses to Wakamoto Haru, Kusano, and Ura, none of which are anything to be ashamed of. He also beat Takano Sho, which looks outstanding in retrospect. After that, his schedule did him no favors, but let's be clear, he did have one match against Kinbozan, which he usually dominates. Had he won there, not only is that one more win, but his schedule very well could have changed for the better. In other words, it's not unfair to say he butterfly affected himself into a disaster. Then again, going 5-8 is likely why he fought Tamawashi and Abi at the end rather than anyone closer to a winning record, so maybe a 7-8 finish was in the cards all along. Kota Shoho, on the other hand, can't really lean on unfortunate. This was just disappointing to dramatically understate the situation. Koto's leg kinda collapsed under him against Takuoho, and the extent of this disaster almost guarantees something was wrong, but overall there was no indication injury was the primary cause of his struggles. And it sucks because I really thought he'd leveled up as a wrestler. Maybe we'll get news of something being seriously off and that, hey, there's still hope for his future. Right now though, my view of him being a higher tier competitor than before simply looks wrong. And then there's Ichi Yamamoto. Kota Shoho was bad, but his schedule included more Hai Maegashira and several Sanyaku. Plus, we had Ichi ranked C- as opposed to Koto C+, so less was expected. But Ichi was so bad, he got skipped as an opponent for Waka Takakage on day 12. This was like Kinbozan back in March, ranked 5 West with a schedule full of lower ranked wrestlers, and he still couldn't buy a win. Like with Kota Shoho, maybe there will be injury news later, but nothing during the tournament looked different about him, other than all the losing. Midori Fuji. I mentioned Midori starting 0-9 in May in the tier list video, but I wasn't expecting him to try and do it again. One thing I'd forgotten actually is that on top of the 0-9, he also started 1-7 in January. This time he started 2-6. I don't know what his deal is, but at the very least, we do see he's very comfortable facing other struggling wrestlers in the later days of a tournament. Scheduling practices always seem destined to leave him in the 6-9 win range, no matter how much of a miracle it might look like it'll take to get him there. Mitakeumi. Mitakeumi was a C- pick across the board, and I think it was just a lot of us crossing our fingers that we'd see another run with his body mostly functioning. And after a rough start that can probably be explained in part by the death of his mother, he found his footing and put up a solid performance. 7-8 won't get him promoted, but to be honest, I kinda like having him stay in this double-digit range where there's always a chance of him looking strong. Hitoshi. For 4 days, this guy made everyone look like a moron for even acknowledging he existed. For the next 4 days, he made us look like geniuses for having hope. By the end, even though he couldn't swing a winning record, he acquitted himself well in his divisional debut. Unfortunately, he's almost certain to drop out of the division in November, but hopefully he can get those Jurio steroids that have been going around and come back better next time. Ryuden. Gods, this hurt to watch. I didn't expect him to be a complete disaster, but almost everything broke his way. Kotoeho looked more hurt this basho than in July when he had an actual reported injury. Mesa usually kicks his ass, but was a mess all tournament. Asakoryu and Toki Hayate each used to be 3-0 against Ryuden, but both lost to him while struggling more generally. If not for Shishi pulling it together and getting his first win in that matchup, Ryuden might have started 9-1. Yuck. And having 8 wins by 10 days, I have to acknowledge he jumps from a unanimous D tier rank all the way to B. Now, I've always credited him with being an intelligent wrestler no matter how much of a twat waffle he is, so he's as capable as anyone of finding wins where he previously couldn't. But the last thing I expected was for him to look like he's getting better. Fortunately, despite Shodai's best efforts, Ryuden's opponents over the last third prevented him from reaching double-digit wins, which is the thinnest of silver linings. At least he'll always be F tier in our hearts. Gonoyama. For a guy everyone expected to finish with a losing record, I doubt anyone saw this coming. He has to be hurt, right? He's always struggled against Ichiyamamoto, but he got completely blown out this time. He had Takayasu in a very precarious position, but somehow lacked the power to finish the match. Power is literally all Gonoyama has. This feels like a situation where we'll get a report of something being wrong a couple weeks after the Basho. For now though, all we can say is he proved everyone even more correct than they expected to be. Now, let's get into the disagreement picks and see who was more accurate. Remember, the win ranges overlap, so it's still quite possible for both the community and I to be correct even when we rank wrestlers differently. Scoring is simple. If a wrestler's final record lands within the predicted range, that's a point. Aonishiki, my rank B, community rank A. Score 1 for the community. Aonishiki deserves another video of his own to talk about his Ozeki hopes, so I'm not going to get as deep into his performance as I could. I'll say this though, his consistency is unbelievable. Not his consistency with minimal experience or at a young age, just as a Rikishi in general. The reason I've underestimated him a bit isn't from a mindless assumption that the competition is too strong. It's that he frequently gets into extended matches, and the longer a fight goes, the more time your opponent has to find an opening. Yes, that means you also have more time to find an opening, but when almost anyone else is involved in these types of fights, the longer it goes, the more it becomes a coin flip. Predicting someone to run through their competition generally means they'll physically dominate. Takeru Fuji, before he got injured, is a perfect example. Takeru routinely blasted dudes more than Aonishiki ever has. That made him an easy pick for strong performances when it seemed like his competition wasn't on his level. But Aonishiki already does better in those long matches than anyone else. July wasn't totally convincing in that respect because he got through the Sanyaku in part on Uchimuso power, then showed the Maegashira couldn't really hang with him. Now, sure, you might cast a little doubt because some of his better opponents were injured, but also recall that he fought Kirishima when Kiri was 4-0. It was an absolute war, and the last match Kiri had where it looked like his body hadn't betrayed him. Aonishiki just beat him with an absolutely brilliant move. Between his creativity and, it's always worth mentioning, the outstanding strategic approach he and Coach Ajigawa consistently bring to the table, it can no longer be assumed his opponents will figure him out. He may stay ahead of the curve for a good long time. Kusano, my rank B, community rank A. 8-7 finish, point for me. I certainly didn't expect Kusano to need all 15 days to reach 8 wins, but the idea he still needs to improve his overall game played out in a big way. He looked a bit lost at times. He seems capable of applying sound strategy, but also that he still needs to learn quite a bit of strategy to make best use of his physical talents. Just figuring out how to hang in against big pushers will go a long way towards getting him into the joy, but he's like every up-and-comer not named Aonishiki. Just because he can do it doesn't guarantee he will. Wakataka Kage, my rank B injury tier, community rank A injury tier. No points here since Waka was struggling to generate power with his legs from around the halfway mark of the tournament. And I say halfway because that's when it became obvious, but in retrospect he was probably having issues the whole way. He didn't beat anyone who had a win on their record until Atami Fuji on day 8, which is nuts. He also lost to Hirota Umi for the first time, but that's not the issue in and of itself. It's that he never failed to prevent Hirota Umi from pushing him back until this Basho. And this time, Hirota Umi simply dominated. Whether it was his ankle or his knee, there was obviously a problem. Meisei and Tobizaru, my rank B injury tier, community rank C injury tier. No points for Meisei, who was a complete disaster. I've said in the past that when a wrestler has a bad back, everything can fall apart at any moment, and Meisei might have hit that point. In the past, when his back has acted up, he always came back at least competitive in the following Basho. This time, he still lacked driving power on offense and had relatively little ability to resist being pushed around. He should stay in the division in November, but if his health doesn't improve, it's gonna be another long Basho. Tobizaru, on the other hand, found plenty of wins early, somehow scoring everyone a point even though he could hardly use his right arm. He has a unique type of mobility that most opponents at this level don't see very much. Yeah, there are smaller, more mobile wrestlers at these ranks, Sakuryu, Midori Fuji, but they mostly aim to be fast. Tobi's very comfortable trying to juke his opponents, and he needed that much more than usual this Basho. We saw his limitations though once he hit 6-2 and his lineup became much more capable. His one win over the next 5 days against Nishikigi was gifted to him through pure carelessness. If his opponents are smart enough to attack his injured side, which is by no means a given considering how many wrestlers just do their sumo, November might be a very bad time, but at least we know he's gonna put on a show. Big batch next. Fujinokawa, Takano Sho, Oshoma, Kinbozan, and Churinaumi. All C+ picks for me, C- for the community. Let's start with Fuji because he's yet another injured wrestler. His left elbow wasn't taped up in July, so that's a new issue. On top of that, while sometimes tape gets used in a purely precautionary way, the fact he took it off for the last 5 days suggests he was trying to fix a problem before that. Whether he took the tape off because his arm felt better or because it didn't seem to help, I don't know, but he was definitely dealing with some kind of issue. That being said, he also had a pretty rough schedule. The one loss I think was very likely to go the other way if he was healthy was to Sadanoumi. One noteworthy aspect of his July performance was how much power he generated despite his small frame, and while he did not appear to have the same juice this time, what we should expect from him in the near future depends a lot on how much of that was due to injury and how much was due to his opponents not giving him much opportunity to use it. If the November Banzuke looks like I expect it will, I suspect he may struggle to start, but come back strong later on. Takano Sho. S tier, A tier, call him either and it makes sense. None of us, however, saw this coming. As the recent legend goes, he's only supposed to pop off like this at Maegashira 6, not 7. I guess this time he figured he was close enough. He won all his good matchups and turned around head-to-heads with Kota Shoho and Ura, then benefited from being able to fight Shodai and Ryuden before the Sanyaku came calling. If you're quite new to sumo, you might have seen this performance and gone, wow, this guy is something else. And if you look at his recent history, this is the 3rd time he's had 11 or more wins around this rank in the last 8 tournaments. But there's a reason he keeps ending up at this rank. The Sanyaku routinely blasts him when he gets too high up in the division. He's extremely good against Kirishima regardless of circumstances, but he only seems able to do well against the rest when he's on this kind of incredible roll. He'll beat Komusubi in November, and I'd love to see him go off again to the surprise of the entire sport. Recent history, however, says he'll be lucky to hit 6 wins and will tank right out of the elite ranks. He put on a hell of a show this time though. Oshoma, 9 wins, point for me. This is the kind of basho that led me to think Oshoma wouldn't be a complete shit show when he hit Komusubi in July. All his losses were to very capable opposition, and he keeps showing the potential to at least put up a fight at higher ranks. He's drawn a clear separation between himself and lower Makuuchi regulars like Roga, Midori Fuji, and Shodai. The next hurdle to clear is the joy wall and find ways to at least not embarrass himself when he lands in the upper ranks. As Kinbozan and Gonoyama will attest, it's easier said than done. Speaking of Kinbozan, his 7-8 record makes everyone correct here. His 1-5 start was frankly embarrassing, especially since he turned it around so completely after that. Beating Onokatsu for the first time was probably huge for his morale, but that's part of why he can be so maddening. Like Shodai, he seems to get in these mental states where he loses hope and doesn't do anything near what he's capable of. It feels completely justified to think that if he'd beaten Midori Fuji on the first day, he'd have finished with 9 or 10 wins, and that's not a good sign. At least he's likely to stay in place and hopefully show something better next time. Churinaumi finished 9-6, and I think I've officially never seen anyone as allergic to 8-7 or 7-8 records as him. This is pretty good for his fans because when he does well, they get to enjoy a strong start and 8 wins being secured with a few days left in the tournament. This time he had his 8 wins after 12 days and only lost out on double digits due to a shocking loss to Sadanoumi on day 14. Outside of that defeat, his basho was very steady and showed why he should remain a stable presence in the mid-ranks the way Wakamoto Haru is a stable presence in the Joy. He doesn't have the juice or the overall game to hang with the higher ranks, but he'll rarely give up an easy win, and his skills are varied enough to do work against the bottom half of the division. Asakoryu, my rank C-, community rank B. I feel like we're all drawn to the way Asakoryu fights and want him to succeed, but he's now spent 5 tournaments in Makuuchi and this is his 4th 6-9 record. This time, like always, he was getting after dudes, but there are too many situations where he's at a clear disadvantage. For him, a winning record requires almost everything to go right, and suffering his first losses to Sadanoumi and Ryuden is anything but that. Finally finding a way to beat Tomokaze was nice, but it doesn't change the underlying facts. he's not big, he's not getting much bigger, and his skill set can only grow so much. Abi, Hakuoho, Toki Hayate, and Roga. All C- picks for me, C+ for the community. Abi. No winners here, as Abi suffered through another basho where his arms just wouldn't do what he wanted them to do. This happens sometimes, so the mere fact of it isn't a shock. The extent of his struggles, though, was stunning. The longest losing streak of his career up to this point was 7. The longest to start a basho was 5. His day 7 match against Takayasu wasn't about who was better, but who was less messed up. The last day, against Onokatsu, he was able to keep his arms straight for about a second. Abi has plenty of detractors, but I enjoy watching him, and this was hard to see. Hakuoho. 8-7 for Hakuoho means points for everyone, but it looked like the community was gonna rinse me big time here. 6-3 with nearly the whole Sanyaku out of the way is a nice place to be. But how do we look at his performance with a torn biceps? He obviously wasn't 100%, but he was still reasonably effective. He went 4-4 after the Kirishima match where he got hurt, and all 4 losses were to opponents he'd only ever lost to in the past. Give him the same schedule at full health and he maybe gets one more win. He's getting better, and if his arm fully heals in time for November, he could well score his 4th straight 8-7. The issue is that sketching by on 8-7s isn't reliable, and he's a lot less likely to keep beating Onosato and Wakataka Kage than he is to stop losing to many of the Joy regulars. He should keep feeding on the guys who cycle up to the higher ranks but don't really belong there, so I don't expect a collapse, but being on the edge of the Sanyaku, or potentially in it if the Banzuke committee is favorable, is not a sign that he's taken the final step towards being truly elite. Toki Hayate. 7-8 record, everyone scores on the back of a fairly strong performance from Toki. That may sound odd considering he was 3-6 after 9 days in Makekoshi before day 15, but he got his first win against Mitakeumi, his first in 5 against Midori Fuji, avenged his July loss to Fuji Nokawa. His only statistically bad loss was to Ryuden, and Sumo's resident circus clown was on an absolute roll at that point. Toki won't move much in the rankings, but like Asakoryu, he needs a more favorable set of opponents if he wants another winning record. That, or develop Fuji Nokawa-like strength at his size, but that seems a bit unlikely at this point. Roga. Roga is Churunaumi's flip side, addicted to 7-8 records. This was his 5th in 8 completed Makuuchi tournaments. Losing to Nishikigi for the first time was probably discouraging to his fans, but I say chin up. What it really showed was his dedication to consistency. Given the likelihood he remains at 11 West in November, I have no doubt he'll gambarize to achieve this profound finish yet again. Sadanaumi. C- for me, D tier for the community. 6-9, point for everyone. Sada looked a little worse than I expected, but not horrendous. At a glance, it seems like a pretty bad sign that he finally beat Asakoryu after 5 straight losses and won for only the 2nd time in 11 matches against Churanaumi, yet still only managed 6 wins. But for the basho as a whole, it seemed like he largely ran into a bunch of other veterans who ate all of their Wheaties. I'd normally give him reasonable odds against Shonanaumi, Hitoshi, Ryuden, Nishikigi, and Fujiseiyun, but they beat him 5 days straight while in the middle of their own remarkable hot streaks. Well, Nishikigi was in the middle of a streak, but whatever. Point is, he ended up about where we all expected. He just took a fairly unusual route to get there. What he needs in November is for a lot of those guys to come back to earth. Ura! My rank, C+ injury tier, although he had the best chance of being healthy given the nature of his injury in July. Community rank, B. Winner, community. You know I'm never going to be upset undershooting the mark on Ura, but holy smokes, he looked phenomenal this basho. I didn't think the contusion he suffered in July would hold him back. What I didn't expect was for the necessary rest to rejuvenate him like this. Granted, slotting in where 10 of his 15 opponents were below him in rank didn't hurt, but Kusano and Onokatsu should generally be difficult matchups, and he was simply better than both this time. He'll be back in the Joy in November, territory which hasn't gotten any easier, but I'm gonna sit and enjoy this one for a while. Tamawashi and Shishi. My rank, C- injury tier. Community rank, B injury tier. And we split these guys. Tamawashi had one fight against Abi where it looked like his back may have played up. Outside of that though, he looked pretty normal, and this is the kind of performance we should generally expect from him up at Maegashira 1. What he seems to be now, besides a record-breaking veteran, is a canary in the Wakataka Kage and Kirishima coal mines. If they beat him, at least convincingly, they're probably okay. If he runs through them, they're probably not. All three will be High Maegashira in November, so there's no guarantee he'll meet either one. As much as they've wrecked him long term though, right now I'm not sure who gets the better of that deal. Shishi arguably still looks like something's up with his leg, but it's just as likely him being a gangly, awkward doofus, said affectionately. Still, one of the reasons he finally got out of Juryo was improvements to his footwork. The failure of his footwork was a big reason why he tanked so hard in May, and it's clearly not back to where it was. At this point though, he looks less injured and more just a little undisciplined with those fundamentals. This highly mobile version of Shishi, awkward as he is, can be successful as we just saw, but he needs to get his footwork settled and learn how to switch from fundamentals to chaos if he wants to stop being at risk of demotion back to Juryo. Everyone agreed the rest of the picks would struggle, it was just a question of degree. Oho, Atami Fuji, Hirotoumi, Tomokaze were all D tier for me, C- for the community. And in 3 of those 4 cases, we all looked very wrong. Atami Fuji's the easiest to tackle in unfortunately several ways. Nothing we saw this Basho suggests he can hack it at this level anymore. I suspect we're going to see a post-Ozeki Shodai type career from him. Several decent results at lower ranks, a pop-off that brings him back to the joy, getting smashed, and repeat. I mentioned this on one of the daily community posts, but Oho definitely benefited from injuries among his opposition in the first 10 days. Takayasu and Abi were shells of themselves, Atami Fuji has that arthritic hip, and the Hakuoho match was after Hakuoho tore his biceps. Obviously Atami's hip issue isn't going away, and it's fair to think Oho would have won at least one of the other 3 even if they were all healthy. Going 2-2 in those matches would have put him at 5-6 instead of 7-4. What's sad is that even 5-6 would be his best start to a Basho since January. As I also said in that post, you can only fight who's in front of you, so credit to him for getting those wins. Still, it's reason to be a little dubious of him repeating this performance in November. If you're an Oho fan, here's the best hope I can give you. Oho finally had a good Basho against Maegashira opposition, going 7-1 against them, and has a lot of good matchups in High Maegashira come November. Now, the Waka Bros absolutely dumpster him, and a healthy Kirishima should usually win. If he can swing at least one win against those 3 though and not lose hope, there's an excellent chance he has another winning record against Maegashira opponents. After that, if he can just go 3-3 against the Sanyaku, which we've seen him do, that's a Kachikoshi. Cross your fingers. Hirotoumi needed a good start to have a chance of success, and 4-1 was pretty damn good. More importantly, it gave him obvious momentum. When he fell to 4-4 against the Yokozuna and Ozeki, it didn't look like a problem. He looked like the worst was over and he was playing with house money. I have no doubt Hirotoumi and his coaches saw Wakataka Kage as vulnerable and decided a complete blitz was the way to go, and it worked. The fact he still fell to 8-7 shows how difficult a schedule he had. But props to him for getting it done, and to the community for showing a little faith. Bless the community as well for not assuming Tomokaze would get absolutely crushed, but nobody saw this coming, and you're lying if you say you did. He didn't even outperform his history that much, considering he lost a stunner to Asakoryu but beat Nishiki Fuji for the first time. Ura and Midori Fuji had never fought him before, so they got their first tastes of big faceplant, and I wonder how Midori will try to get after him next Basho. I'm almost certainly dropping him to D tier again in November, but what a Basho he had this time. And our what the fuck tier to finish, Nishikigi and Shonen Umi. The nature of what the fuck tier is that I'll make a pick, but I feel no shame if it's wrong because these 2 are so mind-bendingly unpredictable. But we have points to score, so this time they count. In both cases, the community had less hope for these 2 than me. I had Nishikigi at C+, which was hysterically bad in retrospect, with the community at C-. The news I came across mid-Basho that could explain this shit show, which I think either wasn't known or hadn't even happened when we made the tier list, was that Nishikigi got so sick pre-tournament he lost 13 kilos. That will definitely mess you up. None of us had a chance here, and neither did he. The less said, the better. On the flip side, Shonen Umi actually showed up for once. Even though we've seen much better from him in the past, I think this is close to his cap now. He fought hard throughout the tournament, never looked completely listless, but he just can't do what his body is theoretically capable of as much as he needs to be able to do it. 7 wins with 2 of them over Nishikigi and Meisei doesn't offer a whole lot of light for next time. Points for everyone, and he'll probably be pretty easy to predict for November. Unless he's not. Because he's shown an Umi, and that's just how it is. And that's the recap for September 2025. Thanks again to everyone who came to the tier list live stream and voted on the picks. Looks like I won a squeaker, 1312, and if you hear it in a computerized voice, it's because I did the math wrong when I recorded the video. I definitely want to do the live stream again, although with different timing relative to the next tier list video. Someone also suggested putting out a Google form so everyone can vote if they'd like, and I'll almost certainly do that as well. Details to come probably after the next Banzuke is released. Other than that, I realize I said it like 20 minutes ago, but I am definitely making a video about Aonishiki and making Ozeki. Keep an eye out for that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.